Hello everyone, it's Angelika Kargulewicz, clinical nutritionist, and in today's episode we will talk about inflammation, how we can deal with the inflammation and how we can minimize the level of the inflammation in our body. If you are interested in this subject, please stay with me today. On the one hand, inflammation might have even a positive connotation because it can be a desirable response to a potential threat, for example, in the form of infectious agent, and it may even enable the tissue repair. And we need this inflammation when we have the contact with different kind of microorganisms and other infectious agents. But the problem occurs when the inflammation is permanent and grows in the body, causing progressive damage. For example, in the form of the chronic inflammation associated with an excess of the body fat. Unfortunately, the chronic inflammation damages the vascular endothelium and also promotes atherosclerosis and thus cardiovascular disease. It also leads to development of the autoimmune, but also neurological and cancerous disease. And also a very well-known term is inflammaging, which means the aging of the body associated with the chronic inflammation. The question is, what can we do to extinguish this inflammation? And the first point will not be about what we should eat, but how we should eat. Namely, the Japanese principle, hara hachi is perfectly reflected here. But what does this mean? It means nothing more than keeping the moderation while you're eating. The hara hachi principle states that you should eat until you feel around 80% full. It helps reducing the risk of overeating, but not on the basis that it is about the volume of the food, but it is about the energy density. But what is the point of it? Imagine that, for example, we can eat 5 donuts during the day and we will provide around 2000 kilocalories, but we will not feel full even at 50%. So it is important to provide so-called food matrix, for example, in the form of dietary fiber, which, for example, in donuts is unfortunately lacking. Let's remember that on the plate, by volume, it can be a lot and it will not necessarily be very calorific. For example, 5 donuts weigh around 500 grams and it provides around 2000 kilocalories. But in comparison, 500 grams of the carrot, the same weight, it provides only 165 kilocalories. Of course, it is not a matter of eating only carrots, that would be very unattractive, but of including a portion of the vegetables and to a lesser extent a fruit with each meal, so that the dietary fibers increases the feeling of the satiety and simultaneously lowers the energy value of the food. And so-called calorie restriction obtained by different strategies, for example, like the Japanese rule hara hachi not only decreases the inflammation in our body, but also helps us to repair, for example, our genetic material, DNA, better. And it is also like the reason for a better insulin sensitivity, less oxidative stress, and better work of our immune system. And let's be clear, it's not about starving ourselves, but it is about more rational eating. Before we move on to the question what to eat in order to decrease the inflammation in our body, remember that it is the total effect of our daily habits that counts, because, for example, when we implement only one anti-inflammatory ingredient, it is not enough to achieve the desired anti-inflammatory effect in total. What really matters is the totality of our eating behaviors, and the question is which actions will promote this effect. For sure, the low glycemic load and the low glycemic index of the food products, but also of the dish we eat on a daily basis. So it is good to choose, for example, the wholemeal grains, nuts, seeds, but also low sugar fruits like berries, and also to incorporate the sources of the protein on a daily basis, like, for example, fermented dairy, but also lean meat, fish, and, for example, eggs. Let's start with the omega-3 fatty acids. Why do they have an anti-inflammatory effect? Because they inhibit the so-called nuclear transcription factor NF-kappa beta, and in turn it reduces the synthesis of the pro-inflammatory compounds. Particularly rich sources of the omega-3 fatty acids in the form of EPA and DHA are cod liver oil, but also herring, mackerel and salmon. An important note is that as valuable these fatty acids are, on the other hand, they are also very susceptible to the changes, for example during storage, but also thermal processing, which is why fish should preferably be boiled, stewed or steamed instead of fried. We should also remember to store fish oil properly, for example in the refrigerator. And the quantity also matters because an anti-inflammatory effect has been observed with a daily dose of 2 grams of these fatty acids, which is an equivalent of a tablespoon of a good quality cod liver oil, but also for example 100 grams of the mackerel or for example 100 grams of the salmon. If we want to reduce the inflammation in our body, we shouldn't forget about phenolic compounds. They are present in a plant world and they are metabolized by our microbiota in the intestine, and the result of this process is the formation of the metabolites that reduce the inflammation in our body. And the question is, in which food products we can find the phenolic compounds? We can find them in fruits, for example quercetin in elderberries, but also very interesting compounds like catechins and epicatechins in chokeberries, but also in blackberries, pomegranates and plums, and for example very interesting camphorol in strawberries and raspberries. Let's not forget about resveratrol in currants, blueberries and grapes, particularly Pinot Noir varieties. And what about vegetables? They also possess anti-inflammatory power. For example, ferulic acid in aubergine, but also camphorol and quercetin in capers and shallots, and for example, luteolin in artichokes. Let's not forget about cyanidin in red lettuce, but also catechins in rhubarb and caffeic acid in chicory. When it comes to the plant world, we shouldn't forget about legumes, because they are also very good when it comes to the decrease of the inflammation in our body. For example, the camphorol in the beans, and the more colorful, the more intense the color, the darker the skin of the beans, the higher content of the bioactive compounds. And let's not forget about the lentils, which are high in catechins and apigenin. High anti-inflammatory potential have also spices and herbs like cumin, sage, thyme, but also oregano, rosemary and ginger. And let's not forget about nuts, and here especially high in bioactive compounds are pecans and chestnuts. And when it comes to a bomb with an abundant amount of bioactive compounds, we can talk about the dark chocolate. It contains catechins, but also resveratrol, quercetin and ferulic acid. Nutrients with a high anti-inflammatory potential are carotenoids. They reduce the production of the pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, but also interleukin-6, and also reduce the production of the free radicals. And the dietary sources of the carotenoids are carrots, kale, yams, but also romaine lettuce. Another important anti-inflammatory nutrient is magnesium, and how the studies show, up to more than half adults do not meet the requirement for magnesium. And the reason for this situation is a highly processed diet, low in magnesium. The requirement for this mineral is around 320 to 420 milligrams per day. Important dietary sources of the magnesium are wheat bran, but here also we have a lot of dietary fiber which can decrease the absorption of the magnesium. And another dietary sources of the magnesium are sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, beans, brown rice and quinoa. And in quinoa we encounter even 190 milligrams of the magnesium per each 100 grams of these grains. Magnesium is also a component of the chlorophyll, so it is also found in the green parts of the plants like spinach. But magnesium we can also find in dark chocolate, and interesting fact it is that, for example, laminaria algae, they contain up to 760 milligrams of the magnesium in 100 grams. Another efficient strategy to lower the body inflammation is moderate physical activity and moreover using a sauna, because it reduces the inflammation within the body. And one study found that the more often participants used sauna, the lower were the levels of the C-reactive protein in their bodies. And C-reactive protein is an exponent of the inflammation in the body. In conclusion, reducing the chronic inflammation isn't about chasing superfoods. It's about choosing a smart, balanced eating rooted in moderation, nutrient density, and also variety. From omega-3 rich fish to colorful plants and magnesium-packed seeds, each bite is quite rebellion against the inflammation. So eat with intention, not restriction, because your plate is your most powerful ally in a lifelong health. Thank you for watching my video. If you like it, please leave the thumb up, subscribe the channel, and see you soon in the next episode.